So welcome everyone. Welcome to this first session of the informal working group for Leadership Dialogue 1, which is part of the preparations for a wonderful international meeting planned for Stockholm later this year. My name is Corley Pretorius and I am part of the UNEP Secretariat supporting the preparations for the Stockholm Plus 50 international meeting. Today's leadership working group is for Leadership Dialogue 1, reflecting on the urgent need for actions to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all. So if I can give you a little bit of an overview of the session, we're going to have an opening session with words from our co-hosts and also the co-chairs for this leadership dialogue. And then we're going to go into the discussion and we look really forward to hearing from you, your perspectives and your inputs. We have divided the structure of the discussion into the 3 clusters, similar to the way that the background document is structured. So please prepare your interventions to respond broadly to these 3 sections. And thank you very much, everyone, for already introducing yourselves in the chat. The chat function is a very key part of the meeting, so please remain engaged. Post your ideas in the chat. There's also Q&A. Question and answer facility. And then beyond today's sessions and the activities in the chat, we are also welcoming your written submissions through the platform. And this has been shared in the introductory sort of email, the logistics note for this session. Let me just say, and we are still counting. We are at 250 plus participants. So as people join, please introduce yourselves in the chat. You are all very welcome. I'm going to hand over to the co-hosts of the Stockholm Plus 50 International Meeting to set the stage for us. And if I can ask Sweden, represented here by Cecilia Varvarken from the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to please set us on the way.
Thanks, Corley, and a warm welcome to everyone that have joined this first informal working group meeting for Leadership Dialogue 1. We're, of course, very happy that so many show interest in engaging and contributing to a successful Stockholm Plus 50. Also delighted and grateful to Ecuador and Canada for having agreed to take on the important role as co-chairs for Leadership Dialogue 1. And the way that you will now guide the work in the informal working groups leading up to Stockholm Plus 50. So the 1972 Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm placed environmental concerns as well as linkages between the environment and poverty at the forefront of the international agenda. And now, 5 decades later, Stockholm again welcomes the world in June this year. So following COP26, UNEA 5.2, and ahead of the CBD COP15, Climate COP27, Stockholm Plus 50 is really a key moment to reinforce the 1972 principles, to provide an agenda-setting platform for visions and actions formulated jointly by nations and stakeholders. And we believe that Stockholm Plus 50 offers a unique opportunity for co-creation, for multi-stakeholder engagement, really involving all stakeholders in a transparent and inclusive manner. In Stockholm in June, we will connect, we will mobilize, we will accelerate for a sustainable future. Connect climate and environment actions with development priorities and the well-being of present and future generations, leaving no one behind. We will mobilize key public and private stakeholders towards green and just transitions, showcasing solutions, and also the potential of transforming high-impact value chains. We will accelerate the implementation of commitments for a sustainable future, generating new actions, raising ambition, exploring innovative financing opportunities. And I think really the broad mandate of Stockholm Plus 50 indeed comes with great opportunities, but also with some challenges. So I really encourage all of you today to use this opportunity to prioritize, to really hone in on where and how Stockholm Plus 50 can make a difference, can add value. And only by focusing on a couple of key issues, actionable recommendations, can we really make a contribution to the urgent transformative actions that are needed to achieve a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, including concrete benefits and delivery on the ground. So with that, I really look forward to a fruitful discussion today that will help us shape the content and priority areas of Leadership Dialogue 1. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And welcome to Ambassador Njambi Kinyungo, the co-host or the other of the co-host for this international meeting. So Ambassador, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Collie, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants, also starting with co-chairs, Germany and Ecuador, just to say how much we really appreciate as co-host. And I also want to thank Cecilia for being present, representing the co-host Sweden, and for the remarks that she has made. We really welcome all the participants. I note that so far the participants are 283. That's really very encouraging and wonderful. And we also know that the participants are a range of member states and the different stakeholders, youth, CCSOs and NGOs, and we really want to thank you for this, and also, of course, professional organizations and academicians and so on. Just to add to what Cecilia said, because I will not repeat what she has said, that we really are looking forward to this meeting, this informal working group being one which, as you know, Leadership Dialogue 1 is overarching, and the issues that are going to be discussed will also pave way for the discussions on Leadership Dialogue 2 and 3, including moving from reflecting where we are right now, why are we where we are, how do we move to the next level. We believe that the outcome of UNEA 5.2 and UNEP at 50, as well as other COPs that have taken place, have really provided an opportunity for Stockholm Plus 50. As we are saying, 50 years down the line, what are the differences that we need to make? We see this as also being an opportunity to not only reflect, look at the prioritization priorities, but also to look at bold decisions or bold recommendations that need to be made. Those bold recommendations relate to dealing with climate change, financing, technological transfer, systemic changes. What is it that needs to be done differently, so that this will then, the recommendations are the ones that will enter into the chair summary, and therefore make Stockholm Plus 50 also one that addresses and also brings some level of change. So back to you, Collie, and we're looking forward to listening to the discussions. Although for me, I'll be stepping out a little earlier because I need to go to the General Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Njambi, and thank you for those words. And indeed also for outlining a little bit the pathway in terms of how we are taking the consultations through from today's session, but there are also other opportunities to participate into the preparatory meeting and then on the road to Stockholm. So there's a whole sort of process movement where we want to bring all these perspectives together. In the next step, I would greatly welcome and appreciate the introductory remarks from the co-chairs for this leadership dialogue. And first I'm going to ask the Director of Environment and Sustainable Development of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador, Director Walter Schultz, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Corley. I hope you can hear me well. Very pleased to greet everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending who you're connecting from. My name is Walter Schultz, Director of Environmental Sustainable Development Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador, and focal point for today's discussion. Ecuador is pleased to be co-chairing with Canada a process of this collective reflection, this informal working group, as we prepare towards the international meeting Stockholm Plus 50. But our Minister of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition of Ecuador, His Excellency Gustavo Manrique, will be the co-chair of the Leadership Dialogue 1 at the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting. In that regard, I will take also this opportunity to express our country's appreciation to Sweden and Kenya as co-hosts of the international meeting for inviting us to take this role, as well as for the important support of UNEP Secretariat. We humbly take this invitation as a recognition for the natural characteristics of our country as one of the most mega diverse countries in the world, with unique and fragile ecosystems going from Galapagos to our coastal region, crossing the Andes to the end in the Amazon. But most importantly, as a recognition of our legal and policy frameworks, which include the constitutional recognition of the rights of nature, a matrix of measures to promote development in harmony with nature, and most recently, a cross-cutting policy goal to achieve an ecological transition towards a sustainable, circular, resilient, and low-emission economy. From that perspective, we are very pleased to contribute to this Leadership Dialogue 1, which is an open invitation to all states and all relevant stakeholders to reflect on the urgent need for actions to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all. What do we mean by that? Basically, it means that we should start with an open, frank, and pragmatic assessment and reflection on how far we have come since the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, including an assessment of the frameworks, mechanisms, and multilateral environmental agreements that we have created throughout these decades, and how to strengthen them. This is somehow what we call the trajectory. Then, as a recognition of that assessment, we should be able to identify the urgency, and this is perhaps a key word of this dialogue, number one, that science is telling us about the evidence of the triple crisis that our planet is facing, from global warming, the loss of biodiversity, and pollution. Not only science, which is extremely important, but also the call from the voices of those who are most disproportionately affected by the consequences of our decisions, our business models, development, including particularly indigenous peoples, local communities, women, children, youth, and the most poor and vulnerable. So we're very pleased to see so many stakeholders, representatives participating and engaging in this process already. Finally, as a consequence of such urgent call, we should be able to come together on the identification of the needs for actions, since what we need is the implementation of commitments that we already have from government stakeholders to take steps in the right direction. This is precisely following the path of what we call to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity of all. During today's discussion, we will seek your views first on ways to advance halting biodiversity loss and restoring ecosystem mitigation adaptation to fight climate change and also pollution, and new measures of progress towards sustainable development through transformation and innovative actions that will lead us to change the way that we perceive, protect, and interact with nature. Then we will be listening to your ideas on how to accelerate the achievement of sustainable consumption and production and to fight pollution. And finally, we would like to hear your thoughts on how to achieve social justice, and I will add economic, environmental, and climate justice, intergenerational equity, and foster cultural education and science to build solidarity and collaboration. We really look forward for today's discussion. Be frank, be open, be daring, and we will very pleased to hear your views and translate that into the next steps towards international conference. So I get back to you, Colleen, and thank you again to everyone for their engagement.
Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, urgency, action, implementation are all key words that we're looking as part of the narrative, the thread, and the mobilization around a Stockholm Plus 50. Great pleasure to hand over to Ambassador Gion, who's Ambassador to Germany and Special Envoy to the European Union for Canada. Ambassador, please.
Thank you so much, Madame Pretorius, dear Cornelia, Madame Wawerka, Ambassador Kinyungu, dear Director Schultz, dear Walter. I think Walter framed the issue very well. I will try to frame it my own way, ladies and gentlemen. I think the issue we are dealing with is fundamental. Mm-hmm. It is nothing less than to try to switch from self-destructing development toward sustainable development. We need development, and we had it, and we need to continue. I will give you shortly, in a couple of minutes, some numbers. Between 1970 and 2020, humanity doubled its population, multiplied its wealth by 5. During this period, the global average life expectancy, that was 56 years in 1970, went up to 72 years. The proportion of people living in extreme poverty on less than $2 a day has fallen from 1 in 2 in 1970 to less than 1 in 10 in 2020. In 1990, nearly 1 in 3 people did not have access to electricity, a third of humankind, which has been reduced to 1 in 10 today. That's our spectacular progress, which must continue. We need development. But the development we have today is self-destructive. We need to realize that. There is a huge problem, which is that the planet is struggling to keep up with us, which seriously compromises our progress and even puts us in danger of regression. We are sawing off the branch we are sitting on. And the Stockholm +50 conference must be a key moment where we will find the solutions to have a true sustainable development. And our meeting of today on informal working group must be focused on that. I want to hear your solutions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador John. And with those stark numbers, really bringing to our attention the critical point that we have reached. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think the stage is set, but let's think a little bit just about the context where this dialogue is taking place. Some of you may know it's the third one, although it's Leadership Dialogue 1, it's the third informal working session that we're hosting this week. And to give us a little bit of an overview, I'm going to ask my colleague, Stephen Stone, just to provide the context of the overview of the 3 leadership dialogues and how this fits all together and on the way to Stockholm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corley. Good afternoon, Ambassador Dion, Ambassador Njambi from New York, our co-hosts, our co-chairs, and you, our participants today. I'm very grateful from UNEP, but also from all UN agencies who have been supporting Stockholm +50 with the background papers. And I wanted to give you a brief overview on how this conversation on Leadership Dialogue 1 towards a healthy planet fits into the leadership dialogues that we've heard yesterday and the day before, the first informal working groups. Next slide, please. If you go to the webpage of Stockholm +50 Global, you will see this. There's the 3 different leadership dialogues. The one today has been laid out very clearly by our co-chairs. It's about resetting the relationship with nature, restoring ecosystems, producing and consuming sustainably, and social justice and intergenerational equity. Yesterday, we had an informal working group on Leadership Dialogue 3, accelerating implementation, the means of getting it done. So if today you're defining where you want to go at Stockholm +50, yesterday was about how to get there and how to go a bit faster. And Leadership Dialogue 2, the informal working group, was on Tuesday. That was on the recovery from COVID. So how to make it inclusive and sustainable. And here it looked really at transforming the high impact sectors of the economy that have the largest footprints, climate, nature, and pollution, but also the labor footprints of those sectors so that they can be truly transformational and lead to that vision of resetting the relationship with nature and towards a healthy planet. So that's the broad overview. Next slide, please. As Corley has laid out and our co-chairs have laid out in the background document, there are 3 headings around which we would like your feedback today. And there's a set of very specific questions to guide some of your feedback. Again, recommendations, best practices, those ideas that you have, you've heard from the co-chairs, the bold, the daring ideas that can put us back onto track for a sustainable future. And the last thing I would say here is, along those 3 sort of top headings where we'd like to get your feedback, when we When we hear you today through the chat box, through the question and answer, and through your verbal contributions that will be guided by our co-chairs, we will be listening carefully to revise the background paper, which is currently on the web, for the preparatory meetings on March 28th. Next slide, please. Which just gives you a sense of how things are moving. We are now in the informal working groups, March 8th to 10th. We will be revising the background papers with our colleagues across the UN agencies who are supporting the Secretariat in this function. And then again, listening to you and to all countries on March 28th in New York. The goal is June 2nd and 3rd, as you said, Cecilia, when we converge on Stockholm and really make the most of this historic moment, 50 years on from that decision that looked at the human environment and started to shift the way our economies functions, our societies function, to hardwire sustainability into our life. So thank you very much, co-chairs, co-host, and Corley, back to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So we're going to move now to as Stephen has indicated, the first of the 3 segments of discussion around this leadership dialogue. And this is going to take full audience participation. We have about 60 people registered to speak, and my colleagues in the chat will answer some of your questions on that. How we're going to do this is we're going to call your names and then so that you know the cue in terms of speaking. And then we ask all speakers to please stick to 2 minutes so that we can accommodate as many speakers as possible. But before we start with the list, I'm handing back to Ambassador Dion with specific remarks around transforming our relationship with nature and restoring ecosystems. Ambassador, if you would like to add anything to that, please.
Yes, Cornelia, very, very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1970, the extraction of natural resources has tripled. 1 million of the 8 million known animal and plant species are threatened with extinction, and ecosystem degradation is accelerating. And we have emitted twice as many greenhouse gas emissions as in 1970. We have emitted more since 1990 than in the previous 140 years. I would like to add something. It will not be very long. We always focus on climate change, and that's true. Climate change is a problem. But it happens once in a while that we use climate as an excuse to not see the other damage we are doing to the planet. If the lake is polluted, maybe it's not climate change only. Climate change is making it worse. But we have a lot to do ourselves. After all, it is not climate change that causes pollution by chemicals, overfishing, overharvesting forests, depleting soils, discharging 80% of wastewater without treatment, emptying groundwater, or sending vast quantities of plastic into the oceans. It's us who are doing that. So yes, we need to address climate. Climate will make everything worse, climate change, but we have a lot to do. Even without climate change, we'd have a crisis in our relationship with the planet. I'm sure we'll address all these issues during the coming discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's hear from the speakers. So on the list for the first round of interventions, I have, if you please, I beg you to live with my pronunciation. If I don't get your name right, I'm going to try my best across the many different languages and locations that we have here at the moment. First on the list, Per Espen Stoknes of Earth for All Modeling Lead, Norwegian Business School, followed by Francisco Melo, Grupo de Pesquio e Ensino na Aeronautica, which I think is the research group on training in aeronauticals, and then Oliver Camp, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, Jojo Mehta, Stop Ecocide Foundation, and Carl Soderberg of Minority Rights Group International. So let's start with Per Espen, please.
Was this Per Stoknes? I lost the connection for a moment.
Oh, you are, yes. Please go ahead with your intervention.
Thank you. So, unless there is dramatic global action over the next 30 years, the world will see more rising inequality.
Well, your connection is quite unstable, Per. Can I go to Francisco Melo and then we come back to you, Per, because it's a little bit wobbly at the moment. Maybe if you log out and come back to the call, if that's okay. Shall we go to Francisco Melo, please?
Hello, good morning.
Yes, please.
Thank you. We're from a group of research from a school in the Air Force here in the Amazon forest in Belém. So there is a series of difficulties that restrict the development of southern nations, and their economic, technological, and ecological matrix are the keys to their development on a sustainable basis, with cooperation and integration between nations south of the geoeconomical equator being essential, even with the limitations of available resources for an agenda with significant repercussions on its production chain. We believe that the next step is the establishment of a community fund among developing countries with the support of developed nations. And the fund would be intended for investments in technologies to mitigate the impacts caused by the pandemic in developing countries, in particular in the communities of indigenous and traditional populations, which have shown themselves to be extremely vulnerable to the lethal effects of the coronavirus. Also, the obtainment of lasting results for the sustainability of the development of the nations of the South will not occur immediately, but it will take place in the long term, which does not mean a discouragement, then a stimulus, given that the disturbances of the environment are widespread and influence in all instances of the countries of the South, with governments and organized civil society having to propose a differentiated path of social environmental management. And the paving of a South-South cooperation will become viable from a specialized work network that will have as a pillar a political, social, scientific, technological, and environmental and economic fraternity, with the creation of an ultranational organization responsible for the articulation of the discussions of problems and resolutions together, respecting national, regional, and local realities, especially the valorization of the millenary knowledge of the traditional populations, the native populations of the countries of the South. In this sense, it is necessary to incorporate such knowledge and its substance tools that are traditionally based on sustainability. For a large part of the environmental diversity of the countries of the South is based and sustained on their social diversity. It is necessary to incorporate this regional knowledge into universal themes, make local practice a locus of a new green economy based on the territory of the people, and that such products introduce a local identity to the world. Thank you. I'm just an interpreter doing here this part for the teachers here researching. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the contribution and for the good ideas around the fund and the use of traditional knowledge. Thank you so much. I see Per is back, Per Espen is back. So can I hand the floor? If I can remind into people speaking that please keep it focused, keep a sort of 2 or 3 big ideas. And I have to warn you, we do have a timer. So we set the intervention time for 2 minutes, and hopefully the timer is going to sort of give you a warning with when you have 30 seconds left. So with that, please, Per Espen.
Thanks so much, and sorry for the sound. Now it's better, I hope. So unless there is dramatic global action very soon, the world will see over the next 30 years global warming, sustained poverty, rising inequity with growing social tensions and huge regional differences. Happily, it is possible to create a much better future with well-being for the working majority. But this requires strong collective action by the world's governments, coordinated by the governments and paid for by the rich. Nothing less than 5 extraordinary turnarounds, breaking with the past, are now needed to stop the decline in average well-being all over the world. We are exploring this as part of the Club of Rome Earth for All initiative. And these levers that we are proposing is to transform poverty, inequality, empowerment of women, food and energy systems. The technologies to do this already exist, but free markets and conventional economics will not solve the problem in time. The cost of these 5 turnarounds amounts to a mere 2 to 4% of national incomes and can easily be covered by the world's richest 10% who control 50% of the global incomes. This transformation will be disruptive, so we need safety nets for workers, such as a universal basic income to reduce social tensions. Otherwise, people will reject such turnarounds. And to finance the post-COVID transformation in low-income countries, Stockholm Plus 50 should ask to change the IMF mandate to issue more special drawing rights to low-income countries. Unfortunately, today, the quota-based system of the IMF means that these SDRs are based on GDP, and 60% goes to rich countries who are unlikely to need them. So we should issue SDRs more frequently and channel them to low-income countries and regional development banks for fair and green infrastructure and climate-related investments scale up before 2030. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And the 5 actions, if you like, I also encourage all participants, if you like to put a link to the resources in the chat, then these can be captured as well. Next, please, I would like to invite Oliver Camp of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity to contribute in such distinguished company. Again, welcomed the fact that last month's IPCC Working Group 2 report recognized the links between climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem damage to food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition. These are unfortunately issues that are once again on the rise. We cannot have a healthy planet without healthy people, and we cannot have healthy people without a healthy planet. We know that food systems cause environmental damage, while in turn that environmental damage and climate change put food systems under ever greater strain. The good news, though, is that interventions in food production and consumption can bring simultaneous multiple benefits to human and planetary health, as well as to jobs and livelihoods. So we must therefore, and again, want to call for greater support to governments, businesses, and consumers to transform food systems in terms of what we grow, how we grow it, tackling food loss and waste, shifting diets, and ensuring greater resilience in food supply chains so that adaptation measures prevent a potential nutrition disaster in future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. And indeed, a focus on the food systems is something that we have a very shared ambition in terms of the action that's required around that. Final 2 speakers on this round. First, Jojo Mehta, and then Carl, please. Jojo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. In the context of this question of urgent actions to transform our relationship with and restore nature, we would urge the conference to support adoption of an international crime of ecocide at the International Criminal Court. Recent IPCC reports show how the crisis of climate and biodiversity, now sometimes referred to as the triple crisis of climate, pollution, and nature, have deepened despite global efforts. Key to the inadequacy of the global response so far is the absence of a binding legal framework to prevent old, destructive, and often colonial practices, business as usual, from continuing. Practices that threaten not only the environment and communities, but peace and security as well. Recognition of an international crime of ecocide, or a fifth crime against peace, could be the powerful strategic tool that has been missing, creating the preventive guardrail needed to deter severe harms, strengthen existing laws, and help redirect policy and funds towards a safe and peaceful future on a healthy planet. Such a law has the power to concretely transform our relationship with nature. In Stockholm exactly 50 years ago, Swedish leader Olof Palme urged the international community to address together the severe destruction of the environment, sometimes described as ecocide. His words still resonate because they are not yet fulfilled, but they can be. Last year, an independent panel of 12 experts from around the world, convened by our foundation, drafted a consensus legal definition of ecocide, which has been described by Frans Timmermans, Vice President of the European Commission, as an excellent starting point for governmental discussions. It would be fitting and deeply appropriate on this important anniversary of Palme's call to action for those discussions to be a key consideration at Stockholm Plus 50. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jojo. Next up is Carl Soderberg, please, Minority Rights Group International.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I'd also like to thank the organizers of this very inclusive leadership dialogue process. My comments are primarily focused on the very first question, and especially the goal of conserving 30% of lands and oceans by 2030, which sounds very laudable. However, especially Indigenous peoples and their allies, including my colleagues and myself at Minority Rights Group, are sounding the alarm that the 30 by 30 goal risks being an excuse for, quote, business as usual, unquote, land grabbing, violence, targeting of environmental rights defenders, and displacement, as we've seen with other supposedly positive measures such as REDD+ initiatives. Therefore, any agreement that establishes the 30 by 30 goal and any implementation towards it must include human rights-based approaches, most especially the principle of free, prior, and informed consent for Indigenous peoples, and meaningful and effective participation for other frontline marginalized communities, including minorities. This includes ensuring the effective participation of groups that face intersectional discrimination, including women, LGBTQI+ persons, persons with disabilities, older persons, and other marginalized groups within those communities. The same is true with regard to nature-based solutions. There, it is also important to safeguard the traditional knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples, including protection of intellectual property rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carl. And thank you. Just to reiterate also that rights-based approaches is a very important part of the framing for this leadership dialogue. Before we go to the next round of interventions, just quickly back to Ambassador Dion, if there are any reflections from this initial round, please.
Certainly, Cornelia, but I want to hear more the different interventions. I think I will have an opportunity at the end to make a conclusion. I think it's enough. I want to hear more people.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So on the next round, we have Claire Blanchard of WWF International, Richard Folland, Carbon Tracker Initiative, Andrea Hurtado Epstein, Healthcare Without Harm, Steve Hartman, Director Bridges Coalition in the UNESCO Management of Social Transformations Program, and Ms. Sayer Rashid Beg of the Youth Task Force. So again, if I can remind everyone to keep it focused and short, I'm going to hand the floor to Claire, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks to our hosts for welcoming us. Also welcome this inclusive process and hope this will be reflected in the final conference, of course. WWF wishes to talk to a consensus built across 14 organizations, and I'll put the list in the chat. As you know, humanity faces three existential and interconnected threats: biodiversity loss, climate change, and inequitable human development patterns, requiring actions catalyzed through clear, measurable goals in order to transform our relationship with nature and restore ecosystems. So what we're proposing is to complement the carbon neutrality goal for climate and the SDGs to create a fairer world. We need a nature positive goal by 2030. With multiple governments and non-state actor groups already supporting this goal, we suggest that leaders' dialogue outcomes should include 1, a commitment by governments and non-state actors to achieve the goal to be nature positive by 2030, ensuring equity and respect for human rights. 2, a recommendation to embed a nature positive in the 2030 mission of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As WWF, we also proposed for this to happen, action on the common drivers of these multiple crises is essential. This is why we encourage Leaders Dialogue 1 to also result in a commitment by governments to present to halve the footprint of production and consumption by 2030 in an equitable way, and building on multiple existing commitments from the food system summits and beyond. A recommendation to the CBD negotiations to include such a milestone, but accompanied with specific targets on sectoral efforts required to get there. Concrete action for a nature positive transformation of key sectors, which of course includes food, forestry, infrastructure, again, building on past commitments, and of course, sustainable consumption and production is a strong link with plastics, and we should build on UNEA outcomes of the decision to have a mandate to negotiate a treaty for plastics. Finally, the economy being a key driver, tackling an equitable and inclusive transition to a nature positive economy will be required alongside net zero efforts. This is why we recommend that Leaders Dialogue 3 actually has a commitment to a nature positive economy and a recommendation to develop a roadmap to get there before 2030. In fact, we're working with several governments and partners to co-create what the roadmap would look like, and would welcome you to join. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Claire, for that invitation, also both for the contribution and the invitation. Over to Richard, please. Richard Folland of Carbon Tracker.
Corley, thanks very much for that introduction. And hello, everybody. I'm Richard Folland with the Carbon Tracker Initiative, as Corley said, and also by way of introduction, I work as a member of the team of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. And my intervention is relating to the key issue of sustainable production and making an important point here about climate change and the platform that Stockholm Plus 50 provides for bold and innovative measures, as we are being encouraged to think big, as we heard in the introduction. Appreciating here that Stockholm Plus 50 is not meant to focus only on climate change and address broader environmental issues, and that is of course vital, but what I believe we're proposing fits squarely within the promise of a healthy planet for all, addressing this key issue of producing sustainably, and also the need for greater and stronger international cooperation to help us to achieve that goal. So the background to what I'm proposing is, as people know, the existing international climate regime focuses on greenhouse gas emissions. But perhaps what is less widely known is that there is no mention of oil, gas, and coal in the Paris Agreement at all. And as UNEP colleagues know well, the UNEP Production Gap Report, last published in November last year, shows that countries are planning to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels than is consistent with preventing catastrophic climate change by 2030, and to produce more fossil fuels than is compatible with their NDCs, underlining the disconnect, in our view, between emissions reduction targets and policies, which the UNFCCC regime addresses, the disconnect between that and fossil fuel extraction. And I should also mention that business as usual on fossil fuel production, as the Production Gap Report describes, would undermine all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So just managed to get through that. I'll put up a link to the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. I see my colleague Alex has already, but really wanted to underline that key disconnect between the UNFCCC regime and fossil fuel extraction. Thank you, Corley, and sorry for running over slightly.
Thank you very much, Richard, and yes, I hope it didn't feel like a boxing ring with the bell ringing. But thank you for the contribution, and making those connections between the sectors and across the sectors, I think, is really important part of the discussion in Stockholm as well. Now over to Andrea Hurtado Epstein, please, followed by Steve Hartman.
Thank you, Corley. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Healthcare Without Harm. First, do no harm, the primary mandate of the Hippocratic Oath and the imperative that should drive us as we prepare to meet in Stockholm 50 years later. As a network of public health advocates, we're here to make a case for placing health at the heart of our efforts to protect the environment and the people it sustains. In practice, this means radically changing the systems that place profit over human and planetary health. The healthcare sector can play a crucial role by mobilizing its ethical, economic, and political influence to realize this vision. Fighting global health risks and diseases, including outbreaks with pandemic potential, is fundamentally about fighting climate change and environmental degradation. Now more than ever, amplifying the voices of health workers is critical, as is recognizing that the health sector has a larger healing mission in the age of climate change. We must build health systems to withstand the impacts of climate change, and at the same time, deploy climate smart and environmentally sustainable healthcare as an anchor strategy to achieve more equitable access to care and build healthier, more resilient communities. As we slowly recover from COVID-19, let us build structures that benefit all people, especially the vulnerable and the poor. Let us recognize and address the political, social, and economic factors that govern how illnesses move through our communities. Let us forge a broad, interconnected agenda for change that brings the fight against systemic racism and all forms of discrimination, together with the global movements for health equity, environmental sustainability, and social justice. On the road to Stockholm, we urge you to learn from our collective tragedy over the past 2 years and move forward with a health in all policies approach. We urge you to bring the health sector to the table. We urge you to keep the health sector at the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Very salient and pertinent to where we are at the moment as a global community. Over to Stephen Hartman, please.
Sincere thanks to the hosts and the organizers of this leadership dialogue, giving me an opportunity to speak on behalf of the Bridges Coalition and the UNESCO Management of Social Transformations Program. In the last few years, the UN Secretary General has regularly used the language of a war against nature to describe the environmental challenges that humankind currently faces. Institutionally and diplomatically, agendas may be fragmented, with separate tracks addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, and important issues such as plastics and other pollutants that are only partly framed well so far still by the international community. The need for an overarching language to pull together the threads of human impact and planetary vulnerability is well recognized. If at a fundamental level we recognize the problem as a form of warfare, then what is the solution if not peace? Once it is acknowledged that a fundamental aspect of the war against nature is precisely the tacit and sometimes not tacit understanding of nature as something separate from humanity, the ambition for peace necessarily calls for an encompassing framework within which the false division between humanity and nature must be overcome in our discourses and in our actions, in our policy and governance structures. Ultimately, a war with nature is a war upon ourselves. It stands to reason that the alternative to a war against nature is peace with the earth, by which we elevate ourselves and safeguard our common home. To ensure peace with and within the earth, a new kind of mobilization is required, built on a relational worldview coming from what we already know about how life works. Conventional, mechanistic perspectives do not address the human gap, the distance between our capacity to act and our ability to understand the consequences of our actions. Two more sentences. It is time to weave together all kinds of capacities and knowledge across disciplines and cultures, traditional and modern, humanities and social sciences as much as natural sciences, artistic and scientific, verbal and embodied, community-based as well as based in existing institutions of research, culture, education, and innovation. Thank you for my intervention.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and well noted. Across communities, across sectors and society, across different actors, connecting different actors. Next intervention by Ms. Sair Rashid, please. Asaya, sorry, Emmanuel, I think you need to mute, please. Asaya, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. Yeah, thank you, Honorable Chair, for the floor. I'm Sara Shabeik from Karachi, Pakistan, speaking on behalf of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. Firstly, we call upon strengthening the work under the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, countries to mainstream restoration efforts for all, and call for all member states to step up financing on restoration and to join the flagship initiative under the decade. Second, and most importantly, there is an ever-present need to both stop current destructive practices that destroy crucial ecosystems such as illegal mining, bottom trawling, and overfishing, and restore them to optimum functionality. Mangroves, seagrasses, wetlands, and rainforests are being destroyed at an exponential rate due to human encroachment and processes. These ecosystems provide nature-based solutions for multiple issues caused by climate change. We call upon member states to align with the 30 by 30 conservation agenda. This is an urgent need to strengthen the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and more concrete actions on climate adaptation measures, now more than ever, as the global pandemic has exacerbated the issue of loss and damage. Actions shall especially be focused on small islands, developing states due to their low carbon emission but high vulnerability. We urge governments to incentivize sustainable development via the implementation of gradually increasing green taxes. This also includes G20 countries to create effective and cross-cutting carbon tax and pricing to ensure a fair and equitable system of taxation for carbon polluters. We emphasize on more promotion of green infrastructure. Lastly, we appreciate the mitigation adaptation commitment that the Glasgow Climate Pact puts forward. Nonetheless, the commitment is not sufficient to the current adaptation gap. Hence, we urge the governments to translate this ambition into effective action in building resilience to reduce vulnerability to climate change. Stockholm Plus 50 is our chance to create this, to turn this ambition into action, and the Youth Task Force is ready to drive this ambition forward. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Sarah. And just to also reflect on the support for the Youth Task Force and engagement of youth in this process. Unless Ambassador Gian wants to intervene now, I'm going to carry on with the interventions, if that's okay. Yep. So the next round on the list, I have Bhavna Chowdhury, then Amoche Nabueze, Parents for Future Global, Nigeria, Kwabi Brandt of ICLEI Africa, Vibeke Jensen of UNESCO, and then Lina Hjertström of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So first, Bhavna, please.
Thank you for the yielding the floor, Chair. I represent the Indigenous, which is an Indigenous youth-led initiative for knowledge sharing between our communities and the general public. I'd like to remind this working group that Indigenous peoples were left behind in 1972, to which extent I commend this background statement for including us 50 years later. I'd like to tell the story of Mr. Jadef Payong today, who belongs to the missing tribe, who single-handedly reforested the largest river island on the planet, bringing back endangered animals like the Royal Bengal tiger and the Indian rhinoceros. Mr. Payong does not speak a single word of English or have any degrees, like many of us here do. Ladies and gentlemen, Indigenous peoples do not need stakeholder meetings to restore our relationship with nature, but we are at threat. And I would like to echo the thoughts of the representative from Minority Rights Group International by emphasizing that over 3,000 Indigenous languages and the knowledge that comes with it are at risk of extinction. I urge you, member states, to make good on the financial commitments and use the policy instruments to work with Indigenous youth who are eager to share our knowledge on behalf of our communities. I urge national governments to include the protection and documentation of Indigenous knowledge as a priority on their political agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, the economic models of evaluating growth must be addressed, and we must extend our protection of IP rights for Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention and reminder, Bhavna, very heard loud and clear. Next over is Amuche Nwabwese, please, followed by Kwabi Brown.
Hello, thanks, Collie. Thank you for pronouncing my name properly. I'm from Parents for Future, Global and Nigeria. And as the name indicates, we are parents organizing from all over the world for a better planet for our children. So aside from the other things I would have loved to talk about, given the limited time, I just want to add that while we fill forms, especially for environmental and climate activities and events, we rarely have the slot for parents. We have for NGOs, for governments, for corporations, for youths, for etc., but we don't have for parents. So we come with this demand that the UN and henceforth other organizations, because the UN is one place that I can start happening, take the parents organization as one that has come and they are able to help in this fight for a future for our children. Thank you.
Wonderful. That is a great suggestion. Thank you so much, Amuche. Over to Kwabi, I think that's it, please.
Thank you very much, Corley, and thank you very much to everybody for this opportunity for ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, standing for cities and regions, that lower level of government below national government, to be here with you today. And I would just like to request that the papers coming out of this process should really acknowledge, as we all know, the vital role that local action and local governments are bringing to the table, and that sustainable urbanization and multi-level governance as a transformative opportunity is very real at the local level. Localized solutions within local contexts are really what the world needs, and we, from a city's perspective, see the value in really bringing cities to the table, to these type of negotiations, write them right in to the solutions as well, because cities are indeed incubators of change. They learn from each other, they inspire each other, and they take hands across borders, exactly like what the world is asking us to do right now, to look at this double crisis of, on the one hand, nature, and on the other hand, climate change, connected systemically to all the other crises that we see unfolding. And then secondly, we would like to appeal that we also focus on multi-level governance. It is very important that all levels of government, like a whole of government, just as a whole of society approach, is brought on board. When we're talking about circular development, when we're talking about sustainable development, we must remember that already more than half of humanity live in cities, and that number is only going to grow, as well as issues like informality in the global south, for instance. And let's tackle it together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Will be very, very helpful. Next on the list, I have Vibeke Jensen and then Lina Hertzschoom, and we're going to finish this round of the discussion with Fanny Tiller-Koenig of the Ministry of Ecological Transition of France. So Vibeke, please.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to take part in this important conversation. In the best interest of time, I'll just focus my intervention on one specific message. It has been said that we need strong action and broad mobilization, and for that we need education. Education needs to be part of all the responses to all the questions that we are dealing with in this webinar this afternoon. It's not the only thing, but it has to have an important place in the discussions around the responses. This was recognized already by the 1972 Stockholm Declaration, but it really has to be also in the new declaration in a very strong manner. Just last year, UNESCO undertook research and we looked at the curricular frameworks from more than 100 countries. And it demonstrated that a very small part, actually not more than 45% of all national curricular documents had reference to environmental and climate change themes. Actually, only 19% dealt with biodiversity themes. So there is a lot to do, but it's an education which is transformative. It's an education that provides learners with not only the knowledge and the skills, but also really the values and the agency to act in favor of the planet. We need learners that are able to solve complex problems related to the environment, who are creative. And we need to give all learners a hands-on experience in how to act locally, but also think globally. So this is very much part of the Sustainable Development Goal 4.7. And we really feel from UNESCO's side that there need to be a very strong emphasis going forward on education in the declaration, but of course also on mobilizing countries to really take action at the local level. So with this, thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Vibeke, and a lot of support for education in the chat as well. We certainly need to unlearn a few things, and there are many new skills that we will need for the future. Second to last intervention for this round to Lina, and then followed by Fanny Tiller-Koenig, please. Lina.
Thank you. The interlinked environmental catastrophes that are wreaking havoc through ecosystems and social systems can be most sensibly framed as a great security threat to the planet and to human viability. Existing structures in place to face security problems, militaries and militarized organizations, are incapable of solving problems of pollution, global warming, and destruction of ecosystems, and are in fact one of the biggest drivers of climate change and environmental destruction. Militaries are huge consumers of fossil fuels, and military equipment require massive production and consumption of highly energy costly materials. Military violence disproportionately affects women and marginalized communities. Any serious attempt to handle the climate crisis requires a feminist analysis of security. To be realistic about achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and saving the planet, we need to be realistic about how we talk about security and make a shift away from the militarized national security to human and ecological security. Reaching the set goals and achieving climate justice means disarmament and demobilization of militaries. Military organizations must immediately report their carbon emissions, their energy use, both fossil-based energy and energy from other sources, as well as the emissions and energy use of production of all equipment, infrastructure, and weapons, including nuclear weapons. Reducing military expenditure and redirecting resources and research from militaries to sustainable sectors will provide a mutually reinforcing positive effect. It will reduce environmental harm from militaries and will free up resources for renewable energy, ecological regeneration, and genuine climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very fitting and pertinent message, Lena. Madame Fanny Tiller-Koenig, please, of France. If you can, if you would like to take the floor still for France, Fanny Tiller-Koenig. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the floor, and yeah, thank you. I would like to speak also on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Thank you for organizing this session today. In our views, it's be really important that this leadership dialogue would be the opportunity to examine how to reform our measure of economic success, to move away from a measure based on GDP and on an economy based on pollution, depletion of ecosystem, and increased emissions, and instead really reflect on how to consider the sustainability of the economy and new models where health and well-being of people and ecosystem are at the earth. It is important that the imperative to decarbonize national economies and build resilience is underscored at Stockholm Plus 50 and in this leadership dialogue. And we believe that we should reflect on strategies for just transition with concrete solutions, including through green budgeting and fiscal subsidies reforms. Concrete action would be, for example, to also follow up with the COP26 initiative to phase out from fossil fuel industries, as well as other alliances launched to decarbonize the economy. We also believe that transforming our relationship with nature should be reflected in this discussion by covering the role that nature-based solution can play in addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, and the need to knowledge sharing and global collaboration to promote and successfully implement nature-based solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear and concrete actions for the list. So we're going to end this round of the discussions on of this first section. And I'm going to hand back to Ambassador Dion, please, if you have reflections on the session so far.
Certainly, Cornelia, it was very, very interesting. I think the main point that is very clear in all these interventions is how much everything is connected and will not succeed if we work in silos. For example, that's been said, and it's so true, that if we want to reach the 30-30 goal, which is to protect our lands and our oceans by a third of it for 2030, we need to do it in respecting human rights. Otherwise we'll fail. It has been said that a nature-based solution needs to be built on the knowledge of indigenous people. It has been said that if we want to find the solutions, we need to educate everyone. We need to have much more education. So there is a link between all this, that more and more people are living in cities. So the way we build our cities will be very key, that we cannot think only the central governments will make it. We need to involve all levels of government. It has been said, it is so true, that if we continue to spend more and more in the military and less in ecology, we'll not make it. And in fact, all the military experts and ecological experts agree that the geopolitical tensions are an amplifying factor that is destroying the environment and affecting the whole planet. Takes the current war in Ukraine. Well, the terrible situation is not only in Ukraine. The IMF just said that Africa is at risk because the price of food, the price of fuel will go up. And I think Cornelia will have the opportunity to come back later. I would like to address an issue, which is how can we have development without coal? That's a big issue for the world because many countries, they need to have affordable energy to have development. And today the solution is coal, and coal is the most polluting and emitting source of energy. So it's very nice to say to them, don't use coal, but they need to have energy. We need to work all together to find a way to get out of fossil fuels while having development for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And that is for pinpointing one of the critical points in the discussions and the difficulties that we're dealing with. It is also the perfect segue to the next session on producing and consuming sustainably and fighting pollution. So this is exactly what we will explore. But before I announce the speaker list, then I would like to ask Ecuador, please, for some framing comments.
Thank you very much, Corley. And dear participants, again, as announced previously, the second part of our discussion today will focus on producing as consuming sustainably and fighting pollution. You have all the background paper, which is food for thought, something to stimulate the discussion and your reflection, which start, as you will see, with the scientific evidence that demonstrate that current patterns of consumption and production are unsustainable. They are fueling climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, as well as pollution and waste. That for examples that also Ambassador Dion has provided different figures and also the different interventions as well. To reflect that precisely on that basis of evidence, we have committed, not now, but several years ago, including in SDG 12 of the 2030 Agenda, to ensure SCP partners that are sustainable management and efficient use of resources, significantly reduce wood waste and loss, promote sound management of chemicals, and ensure that people have enough information and awareness of sustainable developments, lifestyles, and so on. However, in spite of that, those recognition and commitments, we have made little progress to achieve such goals. We have clear evidence of the triple crisis that I mentioned before, and therefore we need to reflect really on what urgent actions, national policies and programs, business models and practices are needed to incentivize SCPs. We would like to hear from everyone what knowledge, capacities, and technologies are needed and available for that purpose, in particular for developing countries. We also need innovation, incentives, and all types of measures to enhance the participation of all relevant stakeholders, including in particular private sector. And we need also an enhanced access to financial resources from all sources, public and private, and national, international. So as you will see, one of the questions under this discussion stream refers to which economic institutions and mechanisms at all levels are in a better position to provide and mobilize such finance and incentives. Fortunately, we don't need to start from scratch, since today there are a large number of approaches, sustainable alternatives and technologies to achieve SCPs, including circular economy approaches. But to address these, we need to enhance international collaboration. The fragmented national, regional initiatives are not enough to cope with the challenge to facilitate access to technology, capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation for all countries, all stakeholders, which also need to take responsibilities, keeping in mind the goals of eradicating poverty and achieve sustainable development. A clear example, and with this I will end, of the good opportunities and the good responses that we can achieve at the global level are the different initiatives and actions to fight plastic pollution, especially those that address the full life cycle of plastics. We have different initiatives at all levels, but taking into account the global scale of the threat of plastic pollution, we achieved only a couple of weeks ago in UNEA a mandate to start the preparation of an international legally binding instrument to address plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, with the mandate to address it with the full cycle of plastics, microplastics, taking into account all the dimensions, taking into account the principles of Rio, taking into account the needs of developing countries, the science-based approach, and also the needs of those that are more vulnerable to this type of impact. So with that, I will very, very glad to hear your views, proposals, ideas, or reflections addressing the questions. So I get back to you, Corley. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those introductory remarks and also for the reference to the UNEA decisions. Let me see on the list the first round of our interventions for under the subject matter. We're going to start with David Kolster of Stockholm Resilience Center, followed by Neza Belkachla of the Association Démocratique des Femmes du Maroc. Then from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands, Damon Boyman. And number 4, Santosh Kumar Venugopalan of the Vals Institute for Science and Technology and Advanced Studies. And then Ashish Kolar, UNDRR, Disaster Risk Reduction. So please, first to David. If David is here.
I think we don't have David on the line.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we can go to Neza, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for organizing this. I'm from the Democratic Association of Women of Morocco and representing WLP International. I'm here to advocate for a gender-specific approach to heal the world. I can notice that in Paris agreements, Women empowerment is mentioned only in the considerations and not included in the articles, for example. If we want to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all, we need to approach it from a gender perspective. There should be some kind of pressure on the states to respect their commitment towards the UN conventions and covenants to which they are parties, particularly the CEDAW and SDGs. CEDAW, for instance, urges government in Article 14 to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in rural areas in order to ensure on a basis of equality and between men and women, that they participate and benefit from rural development, to participate in the elaboration and implementation of development planning at all levels. There is a great connection between SDG 14 and SDG 5, for instance. There is a great connection between climate change and SDG and other SDGs like SDG 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about, I'm going to skip the impact on women or climate change on women and go to the recommendations. So I think we should reform and enforce land and property lands for women, cater for women's priorities and needs, empower women socially, economically, politically, and technologically, prioritize women in terms of funds. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Neza, thank you very much. If you like, please add additional points in the chat, and I can also draw everyone's attention to the Q&A. There's a lot of activity happening there also for those that have refined multitasking skills. Please have a look at that. So we established that David is not here. Damon Boyman, please, of the government of the Netherlands. I think you just need to unmute, please.
Yes, thank you. I think there was being made a mistake. I mentioned that I did not want to make an oral intervention, so I think we can continue to the next one. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. Next up is Ashish Kolar of UNDRR, and then followed by Asa Persson of the Stockholm Environment Institute, please.
Thank you so much. I haven't prepared detailed written comments, but I just have a few comments that I wanted to make here. So I work with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and we are in the middle of the midterm review of several frameworks that were agreed in 2015. So including the SDGs, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Addis Ababa Financing for Development Framework, and the Paris Agreement. Specifically in the context of the midterm review of the Sendai framework, we are looking at how the systemic nature of risk affects a number of issues, and how a number of issues in turn affect the systemic nature of risk and how it plays out in development trajectories. To that effect, what we wanted to bring to this conversation is some of the views that have been highlighted by stakeholders within the midterm review process. Something specifically pertinent to this dialogue is the idea that, and this relates to something the ambassador was saying earlier, relates to reconciling the trajectories of ecological footprint and progress in human development. While our current follow-up and review and monitoring frameworks are quite good at tracking progress that we have made on the SDGs, specifically in human development, they do not do so in a sense which accounts for the ecological footprint spent on creating this progress. So I guess the inquiry / comment here is to work towards a model of tracking progress, which not only tracks progress, but also tracks the ecological cost of that progress, and hence creates a more holistic index moving forward. So yeah, I just wanted to.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much for that, Ashish. And if I understand you correctly, new measures and metrics to track progress on sustainable development is definitely part of the background paper and what we would like to look at. next on the list, I have Asa Persson, please, of the Stockholm Environment Institute. And then it's going to be followed by Irene Bernhardt of the International Maritime Organization. Asa, please.
Thank you very much to the co-chairs and organizers. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. From the Stockholm Environment Institute, we wanted to highlight 4 actions to incentivize sustainable consumption and production. And across these 4, it's imperative to consider equity. Our research on the carbon inequality era showed that the poorest half of the global population emitted only 4% of global emissions. That's just one stark statistics. So first action, agree a joint plan to make sustainable lifestyles the easy choice, not the difficult one, through choice editing, regulating advertising, and amplifying norms of sufficiency. Second, on sustainable production, reward pioneering companies that switch from selling products to selling functions and call on governments to enable this through public procurement. Governments should set stronger product sustainability standards to promote repair and reuse. They should invest in materials recycling globally and recognize that the design phase is the most critical for minimizing environmental impacts. Third, on jobs, ensure that a transition to circular economies does not result in net loss of jobs. Develop best practices globally on creating green and decent jobs to ensure broad-based public support for this transition. And finally, on innovation, evolve the current paradigm of technology transfer, which has not successfully built innovation and deployment capacity in low-income settings, and envision a paradigm of co-development of technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Also very, very crisp and clear recommendations. Next on the list, I have Irene Bernhardt of the IMO, and then followed by Anders Wakeman of the Club of Rome.
Thank you very much. I am Irene Bernhardt, and I'm speaking as a Filipino seafarer. I am here to provide my input on 2D, the actions needed on pollution issues, including plastic, to raise global ambition, etc. It is true that the maritime industry, similar to all other sectors, are faced with massive pressure to achieve net zero by 2050. Here are the actions the sector is working on. Under the Glow Litter project, it includes assisting developing countries to prevent and reduce marine litter, especially those within maritime transport and fisheries sector, and identify opportunities to reduce plastic use in both sectors, and capacity building to enhance enforcement of relevant instruments. Secondly, under the Global Maritime Technologies Cooperation Center Networks, or the GMN, they are promoting technologies and operations to improve energy efficiency and help navigate shipping into a low-carbon future. These centers are selected per region to focus on technical cooperation, capacity building, and technology transfer. Thirdly, another environmental threat that is oftentimes underestimated is the invasive aquatic species introduced through biofouling. The sector is combating this through global fouling management, which fosters an intervention at several levels, driving legal policy and institutional reforms in countries, developing capacity to enact a national policy, and bringing in active private sector partnership. To conclude, the maritime industry is a sector often forgotten, but is an integral part not only for their contribution of delivering at least 90% of the global trade, but also as powerful actors for climate improvement. Thank you very much, moderators, chairs, and co-chairs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that intervention. It is indeed a sector that we don't hear so much and so often about. So thank you for the contribution. Last one on this round to Anders Wakeman, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I represent the Club of Rome, who 50 years ago, as you may recall, launched the Limits to Growth report. The report warned about overshoot and collapse in the 21st century. And today we know that the human footprint has continued to grow and now exceeds planetary boundaries in several areas. The Canadian ambassador talked about the self-destructive development pattern. Nature's ability to sustain mankind has never looked more at risk. The pandemic has also shown how vulnerable we all are and how interconnected we are. And the irony is that we are in overshoot, and yet 3 to 4 billion people still live in deep poverty. My colleague Per Espen Stoknes has already referred to a forthcoming report from the Club of Rome, the Potsdam Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and the Oslo Business School, Earth for All, where we have identified 5 extraordinary turnarounds, focusing on inequality, poverty, gender, energy systems, and food systems. A cross-cutting issue in this report is devoted to materials. Most people seem to believe that if we only address energy by efficiency and by abandoning fossil fuels, sustainability challenges would go away. But materials are just as important. The extraction and processing of materials make up 50% of carbon emissions and 90% of biodiversity loss. Demand for materials have tripled since 1970 and will double again, according to business as usual, in the next 25 to 30 years. Material footprints are extremely uneven. Footprint in Sweden may be 27 tons per person. In a country in Southern Africa, maybe 2 tons. So we have to do something about this. And we have to address consumption patterns. We have to move towards a circular economy. And there, I believe the cost structure of the economy is absolutely critical, because our experience is that virgin materials most often are cheaper to use than secondary materials. And that has to be changed. And I have to stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for pointing that out. And indeed, the focus on materials and circular, improving resource efficiency is a very important part of the discussion. And if I can do a little bit of marketing for the International Resource Panel, there's great materials and research reports on exactly this item available. So I can also recommend that participants look at that. But back to Ecuador, please, for some observations and reactions to the conversation so far.
Thank you, Corley. I was tempted to follow the same example of Ambassador Dean to pass, but just very brief comments or a couple of comments. First of all, we have taken very careful notes of all the important views, proposals, ideas, including on the issues of gender, the need to track progress, and including or match with the track of the ecological print of the progress that we have made so far. The need for investment, the importance of design, the design phase as critical phase of SCPs or circular economy approaches as well, the importance of green and decent jobs as well in this regard. And here I always see why ILO and ILO dialogues and architecture is not linked with the environmental agenda as much as it could, including climate change, biodiversity, and so on. How to attract with high salaries, especially particularly for young people working in sustainable activities. This is very important also with connection with the youth. And the reports that the representative from the Rome Club mentioned, and I would add other reports that we have as well that also have been referred to in the different recent resolutions, including the resolutions on circular economy adopted in UNEA last week. So perhaps to comment in that regard, and I'm looking forward to hear more views and proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, yeah, the UNEA resolutions are also out there. In the second round of interventions on this subject matter, I have the following on the list: Anders Oskal of the World Reindeer Herders, Ms. Dalia Marquez, Youth Task Force, Saurabh Sonwani of the University of Delhi, Santosh Kumar, sorry, I think I mentioned you earlier and the list changed a bit. So Santosh Kumar Venugopalan and Lucy Ma. So first over to Anders, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Indigenous pastoralist peoples depend on marginal and variable resources and mobility living in the most inhospitable natural environments of the planet. We are among the very first to experience the most severe impacts of the combined effects of climate change, biodiversity loss, and globalization. And we are about to be left behind, facing broad social injustice. Our peoples are often hit multiple times over, first by the impact of climate change, and then by climate mitigation, with so-called green energy development encroaching our ancestral lands. So you ask for bold recommendations. Well, I think to actually do what we all, in fact, have committed to is more than bold enough when we look at what is actually happening. One must efficiently address the land expropriation and conversion. One must uphold the UN rights-based approach based on UNDRIP, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 27, CBD, Article 8J, the FPIC principles, as was mentioned, and other instruments. Pastoralists' holistic traditional knowledge must be fully respected, understood, and utilized. And the SDG principle of leaving no one behind must also apply to pastoralists. Prosperity for all have to mean something, and something concrete. The 50+ event should be remembered, for this time also including indigenous pastoralists, because we need the world to listen to what we historically have been trying to explain concerning how humans need to relate to nature. Ologihtu. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for drawing the attention to land use change, because that is so related to the way that we produce and what we consume and what we demand through our supply chains. Next up is Ms. Dalia Marquez of the Stockholm +50 Youth Task Force. Please, Dalia.
Dear Chair, Member States, and distinguished colleagues, I am Dalia Marquez from Venezuela and Colombia. I am the focal point for SDG 12 for the Major Group for Children and Youth, and speaking on behalf of the Stockholm +50 Youth Task Force. First, we highlight that sustainable consumption and production is a cross-cutting priority, and currently there is no framework to govern SCP. The Youth Constituency strongly calls upon Stockholm +50 to recommend creation of a governance framework for the SCP through the One Planet Network. We highlight that a functioning SCP governance is essential to achieving societal transformation. Secondly, nutritious, safe, and sustainable food should be affordable and accessible to all. And this can be achieved through a transformation of our agri-food system in line with the recommendation from the World Food Forum Youth Action Compendium. The new food system coordination hub created in Rome must include all civil society, especially the grassroots and farmers community meaningfully. Third, to ensure the healthy and clean land, air, and water, we must work to minimize plastic and chemical waste. We welcome the mandate by UNEA 5.2 to establish the science policy platform on chemicals, and we call upon full and meaningful inclusion of all major groups in the next steps to establish the platform. Finally, we celebrate the agreement achieved at the UNEA 5.2 to negotiate an internationally legal binding instrument by 2024 to end plastic pollution. We highlight the necessity to declare global crisis on plastic to call for urgent actions which impact and prioritize innovation in technology for plastic cleanups. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dalia, and support from your colleagues in the chat, and also picking up on comments picking up on food systems, sustainable food systems. So thank you so much for that intervention. Next up is Saurabh Sonwani, please, University of Delhi.
Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity of oral intervention, and thanks, Colin, for my brief introduction. I'm representing ECRs of ILIPS, a part of Future Earth from South Asia and Middle East region. I wish to say a few words about the issue that says what policies are required in the next 5 years to reduce the material footprint. So the policy must be embraced to improve resource efficiency, reduce waste, and mainstream sustainability practices across all sectors of economy. Then to access finance and the strengthening of resilience and adaptive capacity that need to be scaled up at a much faster pace, particularly among low developing countries and developing states. Then protected area and policies and treaties that encourage responsible extraction of ocean resource are critical to confronting these threats. Then developing countries can launch a process to formulate and implement a national adaptation plan to reduce their vulnerability to climate change, and to integrate climate change adaptation into national development planning, and to develop key biodiversity area can be also vital to ensuring the long-term and sustainable use of the natural resources. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Thank you for that intervention. Oops, sorry, I missed my list now a little bit. Santosh, please. Santosh Kumar Venugopalan, please.
Good evening to Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, your sound is very faint. If you can, maybe I can speak up a little bit, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity. And I'm Dr. Santosh Kumar, Professor from Wales University, India. I would like to emphasize on the general points, solutions. The primordial force is Mother Nature. Mother Nature means sky, earth, water, air, and fire. Mother Nature is entirely unique one, and science is entirely unique. We have to focus on the current issue through Mother Nature's point of view and also through science view. Respect, pray, and live along with Mother Nature, that will show the right path to the mankind. All mother goddesses are known by different names in different parts of the world, and they all represent Mother Nature. Mother Nature-oriented science is good for the planet Earth. Respect, pray, conservation of Mother Nature's resources, and living in harmony with Mother Nature can help to alleviate global issues. In the near future, conservation should be given globally by the international community, United Nations, to recognize worship places for the very important essential places of faith, and can consider allowing the mankind to worship and the Supreme Almighty during the lockdown period for the peaceful and healthy living of the mankind in the planet Earth. Humanity, when they visit their favorite places, they will be happy. If they're happy, then human body's immune system will be boosted. Hence, it will reduce the stress, depression, and anger. Overall, the charitable acts of the needy and feed the hunger, good thoughts, hard work, traditional food, traditional medicine system, modern medicine, and vaccination will lessen global issues and ensure a bright future lifestyle for humanity. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for that contribution. Last person in this round is Lucy Ma of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, please.
Thank you, Madam. Excellent event. Many thanks and nice to meet you all. I'm Lucy Ma from China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. This is a national class scientific society and a leading NGO in China. Thank you so much for this wonderful dialogue. I'd like to introduce a small part of CBCGDF's efforts. CBCGDF has put forward a new concept, biodiversity conservation in our neighborhoods, beacon. Actually, actually we are losing time for rescuing human beings ourselves. We insisted that current efforts cannot stop biodiversity loss and climate crisis and pollution, especially plastic pollution. The UN MDGs report has told us that we believe fundamental change is needed to preserve the joint. That's why we have launched the Biodiversity Conservation in our neighborhoods, or Beacon initiative, to encourage people to conserve biodiversity in their daily lives, production, and consumptions. It's highly important. It distinguished itself from traditional protected areas and way of life. It advocates a new way of life. A new kind of conservation advocacy is needed to start immediately. That is biodiversity conservation in our neighborhoods that empower people, includes the IBLCs from all walks of life to protect nature around them within reach in their daily life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very clear recommendations there from Lucy Ma as well. I am going to hand back to Walter if you have any other responses or reactions, and then maybe we can move to the next session on social justice and intergenerational equity, because I see we are running quite quickly through time, despite the good timekeeping from all the interventions.
Thank you, Corley. Try to be very brief, just to take into account the importance of the comments and reflections, proposals made with regard to the indigenous peoples and local communities, and the need to not only recognize them as their vulnerability, but also their contribution to address, to achieve SCPs, to achieve sustainable development. We have seen the example, for instance, on the climate change sphere, where in 2015, a local community indigenous people platform was created, and it took 3 years to operationalize it with a working group, facilitated working group, with three functions on knowledge, capacity building, and participation. We also see very important comments on policy resource efficiency and reduce waste in all sectors, the governance framework for SCP that was also referred, and the need to protect Mother Nature with all its components. And here I will bring the attention also to the comments that were made earlier about the need for a healthy planet to ensure healthy people. And I will add that for a healthy planet, we need to take into account some sphere that has been many times neglected, which is the ocean, where now I'm engaged here in New York in the negotiation of the BBNJ instrument on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. 70% of our planet is oceans, and yet we don't have an international legally binding instrument to address and to protect the biodiversity and to protect the health of the oceans. So just this is an example of what is needed also to achieve the healthy planet and for healthy people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for wrapping up that session. Shall we move now to discussion session 3, social justice and intergenerational equity? So I am looking to Ambassador Jeon for some opening remarks, please.
Yes, Cornelia, I think the best thing I may do is to bring everyone facing our responsibility for the generations to come, our children, our grandchildren, and the generation coming. I will give only one example for these introductory remarks. In 1 minute it will take for me. It is climate change. Okay, we are starting to feel the consequences of climate change. We find it very difficult. I am in a country, Germany, where last summer you had floods. It has been awful. And it's supposed to be an event every century, but now it may be an event every 5 years. And if in Germany it has been very difficult, it's a country well developed with strong infrastructure and good engineers, a country that is underdeveloped, imagine the consequence. So look what that will mean if we continue the way we are, where at the end of the century, it's likely that global warming, if we don't decarbonize our economies much more rapidly, will reach 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. What means 3 degrees Celsius more for the world? The IPCC, the United Nations, give us the following description, and I will only give you that, and after I will leave you to discuss and to find the solutions. So it means a growing intensity of extreme meteorological events, rising ocean levels and salinization of land and water, acidification and alterations in seawater chemistry and in fisheries ecology, further extension of animal and plant species, damage to infrastructure and human habitat, prolonged droughts and heat wave with record temperatures at around 50 degrees Celsius. Some parts of the world will not be possible for humankind to stay there. More frequent dust storms and increased desertification, food scarcity, and above all, water stress. Water will be the key problem, and more wildfires and damage to soils. We need to avoid that for the generations to come. I want to hear your solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gian. Yes, indeed, the Working Group 2 report is a very chilling reminder of where we are at the moment. On the list, first round of oral interventions, I have Ben Schachter of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, then Samantha Smith, Director, Just Transition Center, Carol Muffet, Center for International Environmental Law, Ishmael Sidali, Youth Task Force, and Nini Ikela-Neyman of our IRCCC. So Ben, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm Ben Schachter from UN Human Rights. The solution I propose is simple. It's human rights. The triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and nature loss negatively affects the human rights of countless people around the world. International human rights law offers a rule book for averting human rights harms caused by environmental degradation through transformative, people-centered, gender-responsive, and sustainable development. It protects the right to participation, access to information, and access to justice, including in environmental matters. It guarantees all people the rights to benefit from science and its applications and to share equitably in the benefits of development. It calls for education for all with respect for the natural environment. It requires protection of environmental human rights defenders and of the basic conditions necessary for life, including a safe and stable climate, clean air and water, healthy biodiversity and ecosystems, and a non-toxic environment. States' human rights obligations also require them to hold businesses accountable for human rights harms and to cooperate internationally to fulfill human rights. This includes adequate financing and resources to mitigate and address environmental degradation. The benefits of the rights-based approach are recognized by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They are demonstrable, for example, in the case of the recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights to their traditional lands, territories, and knowledge. They are legally obligatory. This is why the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, our common agenda, and the work of the UN Environment Management Group all emphasize the importance of advancing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for present and future generations. And it's why the Human Rights Council just recognized the right to a healthy environment. We still have work to do. We can empower people by integrating human rights, including the right to a healthy environment, in the development, content, and implementation of environmental laws and policies at all levels, and by financing and supporting their effective implementation through inclusive, transparent, equitable, and accountable processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that statement. Greatly appreciated. And very nicely setting the stage for the next rounds. Over to Samantha Smith, please, Director of the Just Transition Center.
Yes, thank you so much, chairs, for the opportunity to speak today. I represent the International Trade Union Confederation, which is part of the workers' constituency at the UN. We represent more than 200 million organized workers in 162 countries. We'd like to suggest that the background paper is missing a very important reference, and that is to the issue of just transition, where the UN now has quite strong architecture from the International Labor Organization's Just Transition Guidelines negotiated in 2015, to the Paris Agreement, which requires a just transition of the workforce, to the Solidarity and Just Transition Declaration coming out of the climate negotiations, the UN Secretary General's Climate Action for Jobs initiative with the ILO, the Glasgow Climate Pact, which refers in several places to the need for a just transition in connection with the phase out of coal, and also the need to support that transition. And then finally, the agreement from the climate negotiations in November from major donors to climate finance to provide finance that supports the conditions for a just transition internationally, again, based on the ILO Just Transition Guidelines. Just transition brings together the rights of workers, which are human rights, as well as other rights such as gender rights, to make sure that climate action produces good new jobs, provides social protection, and leaves no one behind. So we want to suggest that there is action on just transition around the world, in Europe, in South Africa, in Latin American countries, in North America, and in Asia Pacific. And this would be a time to vastly increase it and increase support for just transition in the Global South. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right on time, Samantha. Great intervention and very clear points for us to draw on. Next is Carol Muffett, please, Center for International Environmental Law. Yes, that's what that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Carol Muffett. I'm the president of the Center for International Environmental Law. I am also on the steering committee of the Maastricht 4 process on the rights of future generations, although this intervention is not in that formal capacity. As we work to protect human rights, indigenous rights, the rights of future generations, and the rights of the species with which we share our planet from the converging threats of biodiversity loss, climate change, the plastics crisis, and pollution, it is true that there are no silver bullets, but there are, we must recognize, smoking guns. The International Energy Agency and the IPCC are aligned in recognizing that we cannot keep planetary warming below 1.5 degrees without an immediate and urgent rejection of our reliance on fossil fuels. We must transition rapidly from fossil fuels in order to save our planet. But fossil fuels aren't only a driver of the climate crisis, they are also driving the plastics crisis. 99% of what goes into plastics that are polluting our rivers, our lands, our air, our oceans are fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are also primarily responsible for the pesticides and fertilizer overuse that are driving biodiversity loss among pollinators, among insects, and in coastal estuaries. If we are to protect future generations, if we are to protect our own generation, if we are to stop intrusions into indigenous lands and territory in the name of expansion of fossil fuels, we must end that expansion and begin immediately the transition away from fossil fuels to set a sustainable future for humanity for the next 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent points. Next up, I have Ismail Sida Ali, please, of the Youth Task Force.
Thank you for the floor. Dear Chair, Member States, and distinguished colleagues, my name is Ismail Sidi Ali from Nigeria, from Youth for Our Planet, and I am speaking on behalf of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. First, we call upon Stockholm Plus 50 recommendations and the UN General Assembly to recognize the UN Human Rights Declaration on the right to a healthy environment as a universal human right. Secondly, the member states need to mainstream the work being done under the Montevideo Program on Environmental Law. Global environmental frameworks are incomplete without the provision of environmental law, and provisions of environmental law are recognized in more than 170 constitutions globally. Stockholm Plus 50 should also recognize this and the outcomes of the 73,333 process. Third, we highlight that nature conservation is not efficient without ensuring intergenerational equity. We welcome the recommendations in the Secretary General's our common agenda report to establish a special envoy for future generations. A consultative process must be undertaken with children and youth organizations globally about the role of such an office. And Stockholm Plus 50 should also provide recommendations on the same. The Future Generations Summit to be held in 2023 must build upon the inclusive model of youth engagement in Stockholm Plus 50 and environmental process. Finally, we remind you that each generation has the right to inherit the same diversity in cultural and natural resources enjoyed by the previous generation. The present generation are the custodians of the planet for the future generations, obliged to conserve this legacy so that future generations may also enjoy these same rights. Intergenerational and social equity is in essence become the two elements that must be incorporated in evaluations of changes in well-being to make the changes sustainable. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you so much, Ismail. Very powerful statement. Thank you for making those connections in terms of the things that we need to take into consideration. Next on the list, I have Nini Ikela-Niemann, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, please. Nini, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I wanted to add a voice from the humanitarian sector and really highlight the point that when we're talking about climate and environmental crises, we're talking about the triple planetary crises. These are already creating unprecedented humanitarian needs. They're moving beyond threatening human development to really undermining the survival of humanity. And as a humanitarian actor present in 192 countries, the Red Cross is really seeing that this is having a tremendous impact on the poor and vulnerable people and communities in particular. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that extreme weather events have led to over 20,000 deaths. They've affected 140 million people. By 2050, we're expecting that up to 200 million people every year could need humanitarian assistance as a result of a combination of climate-related disasters and their socioeconomic impacts. And climate-related natural hazards are already displacing more than 20 million people each year. And so there's a really urgent need to implement action that reaches these most vulnerable people and communities, which is equitable and leaves no one behind. And we're increasingly seeing that nature is a key component of community resilience to climate and environmental related disasters, and nature-based solutions can play a critical role in reducing overall vulnerability, increasing resilience of communities to multiple shocks and stresses, reducing the likelihood and impact of natural hazards themselves, and reducing exposure to these hazards. And as such, we're really contributing to the humanitarian imperative. So we'd really like to see recognition of the humanitarian implications of a triple planetary crisis and encourage increased policy coherence between disaster management, such as Sendai framework, environment, climate, and development policies that can adopt integrated approaches to risk management, which address all the crises we're facing, environmental and humanitarian. Thank you.
Thank you, Nini, for that statement. And yes, it connects. Everything is connected in terms of our dependencies on nature, but also comes back to rights-based approaches and in terms of responsibility and justice. So much in your contribution. Thank you very much for that. Final round of speakers. I have 3 left for today before we go into a little bit of a closing session. Is from Richard Jordan, World Harmony Foundation, Pallavi Saxena, University of Delhi, and Arthur Dowell of the International Environment Forum. So Richard, can I start with you, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I just want to stress the importance of the International Day for Women and Girls in Science, February 11, to serve as a catalyst for girls to go into all types of science. And secondly, equal pay for equal work done by men and women doing the same job. Everyone needs to be paid the same wage. Thank you.
Very fast and short, thank you. And a good reminder on taking us back to the equity and equality agenda as well. Pallavi, please, over to you.
Hi, I'm audible.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Now, I am the representative from iLeaps, SSC member, Future Earth, and I am from University of Delhi, India. I wish to address the question that what is the role of education and science in reconnecting people with nature? So it can be by promoting the people to think about environmental ethical principles so that the nature can be better conserved and protected. Then to think and implement sustainable technologies to remediate the pollution in the environment and make the planet healthier for better living. So the sustainable technologies can be the green infrastructure planning, that is basically in the urban areas, which include the vertical gardens, green roofs, green buildings, and also with the help of the scientific technologies, we can reconnect with the nature by encouraging the phytoremediation technologies where those plant species can be screened and can be used, which can remove pollutants from air, water, or soil. Then we can also use the scientific technologies to reconnect the nature by the implementation of artificial lakes, ponds, which can act as sinks for GHGs and helps in regulating temperature and biogeochemical cycles. Then there is one very important issue, that is to promote the sustainable agriculture practices, which can combat crop residue burning issues, especially in Asian countries. And we can encourage the sustainable waste management practices like plastic waste that can be used like in road construction, urban settlements, etc. And more research can be needed in the field of identifying the source and mechanism of chemical species that is responsible for the cloud formation. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much for that contribution. We have one addition, sorry that I skipped my mistake. So Stintje van Veldhoven of the World Resources Institute, and then if that's okay with you, Arthur, then I'll go to you after Stintje.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know this is an incredibly busy schedule. Thank you so much for this inclusive process and for allowing me some time to speak. We've heard so much, and I would actually like to maybe go a little bit above that and say how important I think that we also spend some time on setting the scene at the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, because now, more than ever, I would say it's crucial that we have this conference and that we see that there's no problem that can be solved in isolation. So Stockholm Plus 50 is, I think, perfectly situated at this time of crisis around the world to say now more than ever do we need to come together to avoid future crises, climate-induced crisis. Then also, none of the problems can be solved in isolation. So Stockholm Plus 50 is also ideally placed to connect the dots and then show that we have concrete solutions. It can be done. I mean, all of the speakers before have both highlighted topics, but also have concrete examples of how it can be done. So I think it would also be a perfect moment to show how it can be done. And then a few remarks on the content. I think production and consumption are really a root cause. And if we talk about just transition and we talk about generational and social justice, it's also about avoiding that one part of the planet literally consumes the future of the rest. And it's also about avoiding pollution, ensuring health. So what are a couple of things that we should be doing next to, of course, continuing to battle climate change, like the ambassador said? I think we should work with public procurement. I think we should work with regulation. If you think about avoiding pollution, look, for example, at how the European Union is now pushing for a total ban on PFAS. Not one chemical substances, an entire group to be banned because of the health effect it engenders. Think about public procurement as a way to change trade chains across the world. So I think specifically in energy systems, food, built environment and transport, there is so much that also can be done. It would be great to have those showcases at Stockholm Plus 50. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stintje. Thank you both for the enthusiasm and the excitement about Stockholm that's coming through so clearly, but also for the substantive contribution. So one more before Arthur, actually. So first, Ole Torpman, Institute of Future Studies, then Arthur, and then we're going to wrap up. So Ole, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Ole Torpman. I'm a PhD student or a PhD now in practical philosophy. And I'm working on ethics and ethical issues in relation to climate change and environmental issues. So that relates a lot to questions regarding justice. And I think that when I have listened to everyone here today, it's quite amazing that we're all in such, enormous agreement about so many things, like the goals of sustainability and what we really want to reach. But nevertheless, there's so much trouble finding an agreement on how to get there. And I think that in order to solve these disagreements, I think we need to discuss the principles or the norms or the values that I think underlie these disagreements. And if we don't discuss these, if we don't agree on the rules that we are to play with, when we are to reach these goals, I think we will perhaps never reach them. It would be, as I see it, like playing a football game without having agreed on the rules for football. And I think I just wanted to add that I think that we need to discuss, because even though we have agreed on a goal, there might be concerns about how to divide the tasks that are needed to be conducted in order to reach those goals. And before we have that, we will be stuck. So it's not enough to just agree on goals. We also need to agree on the principles on the basis of which we shall reach them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ole. That's a great systems perspective in terms of where our levers are for change and what are the enablers to help us to achieve those goals. As I promised a couple of times by now, Arthur, please, last word to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to give somebody who was at Stockholm in 1972 to contribute again 50 years later. There is no global governance for big business, which drives much environmental and social damage in the world. The present corporate paradigm has no moral or ethical framework, and you might be considered institutionalized greed with financial profit as the legal responsibility that justifies any means. Stockholm Plus 50 should require that every corporation builds into its legal charter obligations for social and environmental responsibility to do good and to prevent harm. So I think that's another important actor that we need to bring in beyond the states as we take this issue forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those perspectives. What a fantastic session we've had. So I'm going to hand over to Ambassador Gian, please, for some reflections and starting to close the session, please.
Yes, I will not only close this session, I will also give my remarks for the conclusion to gain time for everyone. Cornelia, I think indeed it has been very rich as a discussion. I think it's very clear that we are facing a problem. The problem is that the transition we need to do is enormous, but at the same time, if this transition is not fair, equitable, inclusive, we'll not make it. We need to keep the people with us. It's not only that we need to act in a very comprehensive way, is that we need to be inclusive and to keep everyone on board. I will give my concluding remarks just to focus on one issue, and it is energy. In order to have development, you need energy. People need energy for transportation, for heating, for everything we do. And since the Industrial Revolution, it has been done through burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, that means coal, oil, and gas. That's the way. And in the 19th century, it was great, because otherwise, in order to have energy, I think humankind, they would have burned all the forest and killed all the whales. And then came coal and oil and gas. But now we realize that it's destroying our relationship with the planet in burning the planet. So we need to find a way to give development to people and energy to people that will be different than oil, gas, and coal, and especially coal. Coal is the cheapest source of energy, and the people that are starting their development, they need coal today. But why not to find other sources of energy to be sure that it will be sustainable? And these countries cannot do it alone. We need to have a strong solidarity between all our countries and to be sure that all the solutions we are looking for will be found. And today, 80% or more of our source of energy is oil, gas, and coal. In 1990, when we started to tackle climate change, it was at 80%. So we are not going in the right direction. And we need to find sure that the solutions like renewable energy will not be only something that we do, but will be done in a large scale. We need to electrify our transportation rapidly to capture CO2. If we still need to burn oil, gas, and coal, we need to capture the CO2. To do it really, we need to deploy clean hydrogen. Hydrogen is still a niche today. It must be for tomorrow a source of energy that is very important. We need to better protect our forest to restore green cover, essential sources of carbon sinks. So that's what we need to do. And it's clear that you have been repeating that through these sessions, that we need to do it with the people, with everyone, and with no discrimination. Otherwise, we'll not make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gian, for those powerful remarks. Ambassador Schultz, please, some remarks from your side.
Thank you, Corley. Very well said by Ambassador Gian. We know we need this transformation, and we know this transformation, the need for this transformation even before the COVID pandemic. Now, we also know that we need to recover sustainably from the effects of this pandemic, not only in terms of access to cleaner energy, but also in terms of circular economy and other approaches also that are so much needed to enhance and protect and enhance the health of the planet. This is particularly important and particularly challenging for everyone, but particularly for developing countries. We need to take into account, as has been said, the gender-specific approaches that are needed to heal the world. They need to track the ecological footprint. We need to pay attention to the maritime sector, particularly, including technology transfer and development of marine technology and capacity building in that regard. Also, all the comments and ideas that were mentioned regarding the indigenous and pastoralist communities that need to be not only protected, but enhanced in terms of the full use of enjoyment of their rights and their potential and opportunities that they have, the knowledge has. Also, the agri-food systems were mentioned as also as key action area for more sustainable practices that could alleviate hunger and malnutrition and drastically reduce pressure on nature. And also the progress regarding curbing plastic waste that with a strong achievement recently agreed in UNEA. Concrete recommendations were mentioned, and we took very, very careful note of those in terms of make SCP choices easy, accessible, work with companies and advertisers, the use of fiscal policies to incentivize goods and services, the use of economic and regulatory tools to provide effective and sustainable incentives, and also the fact that, or the need that circular economy transitions have a focus on high quality and decent job provisions, and also to evolve on the current paradigm of technology transfer to one, the north-south, to one that is co-development of technologies which can benefit all. Just to respond to one of the questions that was addressed particularly to me or to my country regarding the recently approved legislation law in Chile yesterday regarding climate change target on decarbonization for 2050. Indeed, this is the first one, but we do have a number of legislation in different countries of the region and all over the world addressing climate change and with strong commitments. Perhaps this is the first one indeed that has the commitment or the obligation in the legal terms to achieve the target for 2050. However, what is needed from my view is, well, ideally, of course, have legislation, stronger legislation, but also the concrete means to achieve the implementation of those commitments, either in national legal instruments such as this law, but also in the international instruments, including the Paris Agreement, where we have all the commitments. We have the global goal of decarbonization, but the means is always important on how to achieve. We will be very glad and happy to have a regional framework for that, but not only in terms of policy framework, but in terms of projects and concrete programs that could be presented and could be also supported by the international community. So with that, I think we have heard again many very important and rich proposals that will be very carefully taken into account and transfer to the next stage of the process towards the international conference. So very glad to have heard all these voices and proposals from civil society and all stakeholders, and even from those very inspiring words from those who were in Stockholm 72 as one of the last speakers. So thank you very much again.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Thank you just for everyone, to Ecuador and Canada as the co-chairs of this leadership dialogue and ably steering us on the way. So final remarks, closing remarks from the co-host, Kenya and Sweden. So Ambassador Njambi, are you still available? I know you said you had to step out for the General Assembly meetings. Ah, there you are, fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Collie. Really, I just say they stay around, but I'll be leaving in the next few minutes. Just to thank the co-chairs, Ecuador and Canada, for the leadership that you have provided this morning, evening, afternoon. And I have listened to the very rich inputs that have been provided at the different stakeholders. And I just want to thank the co-chairs for this very rich leadership that they have provided. I believe a lot of questions, the key questions that had been raised have been responded to, and we've had a very high different perspectives of the different stakeholders who are here, which is very enriching. We've listened to the need to look at even education, to inclusivity, women, across gender, the youth, highlighting also on our common agenda, the agreements that have been signed up or treaties and the need to move forward. So I just want to use this opportunity to really thank everyone. And we can indeed see that there's a lot of reflection, including ideas on what bold decisions need to be made or recommendations. Thank you very much, Holly. And thank you very much, co-chairs and the participants. Asanteni sana. And of course, my co-host, our co-host, Sweden. Thank you.
Asante sana. Thank you, Ambassador Njambi. Over to Cecilia, please.
Thanks, Corley, and thanks so much for your excellent job in moderating this meeting. And thanks to all the participants for a really rich discussion here today, and all your very valuable insights and contributions to shaping the content of Leadership Dialogue 1. Very excited about this. So for some next steps, input will now be fed into the background papers that are to be uploaded on the website sometime next week, ahead of the preparatory meeting on the 28th of March. And when it comes to the next round of informal working group meetings,
No dates are set yet, but we are planning for that to happen sometime in early April. So we will announce those dates as well, and very much looking forward to how this informal working group will really continue to sort of frame the action-oriented recommendations for Leadership Dialogue 1 and sharpen the outcomes of Stockholm +50. I think I'll stop there. Thanks, Corley.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Thank you very much to everyone for participating. I think we had strong endurance in the participants list. We still had 184 people. So thank you for your contributions and for a very lively chat and a lively Q&A. I can also encourage you, please contribute to these discussions where there are national consultations and also there are regional consultations. So please continue to be engaged with this level of energy and a fantastic continuation of the day. Thank you very much.